having pride in your own ideas it's never a good thing.
Jon Blotner emphasizes humility and strong teams as keys to success. As Wayfair's president of commercial operations, he's applied that approach while helping guide the home retailer onto a steadier financial path. The company's second quarterly 2025 report showed growth at home and abroad, with its largest revenue increase since 2021. Wayfair thrived early in the pandemic. Revenue jumped 45% in 2020 as homebound consumers upgraded their spaces, pushing the company to number 217 on the 2021 Fortune 500. But once restrictions eased, sales and the stock slid, with shares falling about 80% between 2021 and early 2023. Now, the company is bouncing back by expanding into physical retail. It opened its first store in May last year and plans new locations in Atlanta, New York, and Denver. Jon is leading that recalibration, determining how to translate Wayfair's online strengths into a brick-and-mortar experience. Hi, I'm Ruth Umo, editor at Fortune, and this is Next to Lead, our weekly series about the new generation of C-suite talent. In each episode, we will speak with today's most prominent leaders who are shaping the future of business and who, quite frankly, have CEO bona fides. How do they get where they are? What drives their vision for the future? How do they turn setbacks into comebacks? We will dig into their career journeys, talk about their big wins, and explore the lessons they've learned along the way.
Are you ready to nurture what's next? Reimagine industries to turn bold ambition into the beginning of everything. What's your next brilliant move? McKinsey & Company.
Jon Blotner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having
President
me.
at Wayfair.
Yep.
Came all the way from Boston this morning.
That's right.
Delighted to be in the city, I'm sure.
Yes, always good to be in New York.
Well, let's jump right into the conversation at hand. You've had a really interesting career path. You moved from Bain. You then went to a jewelry startup, and you're now in a C-suite role at Wayfair, the home retail company. I'm curious, what is a through line that kind of connects all of those roles?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because if you think about it, they don't necessarily always compute, especially the jewelry part. But I think for me, the thing that I always look for and have always looked for is just a space that's got really hard challenges. So really interesting space and where I get a lot of autonomy, and then a place where I can learn from others. So if I think about Bain was a spot where you get to be surrounded by super smart people, work on really hard problems, even as a younger person, and then sort of get to be exposed to these things and get a lot of autonomy. And then I was there for a while. I enjoyed it. I was learning a lot. I knew I didn't want to be a lifetime consultant. So when the opportunity came to join a startup, in a well-funded startup, despite being in the jewelry space, which I knew very little about, same thing. It was a really early development in how we sell fine jewelry online, which hadn't really been done. Hard problem. Did that for a couple of years, ended up running that. And that was just a great experience too about, all right, it's a startup space. It's the challenge is very different. It's all about being a manager doer. You're constantly pivoting. The stress is very different, but same sort of through thread, which is hard problem, a lot of autonomy. We ended up selling that to Berkshire Hathaway, spent a little bit of time at Berkshire Hathaway, was going to do another startup. And then a really good friend at Wayfair called me up and she was like, you just got to come look at it. And at first I was like, Wayfair, that seems like, and at that time, this company was half the size. Like, seems like a big company. I don't know if it's right for me, but it had the same sort of thing I was looking for. Incredibly smart people. It had a problem space that, selling furniture online is sort of crazy, like big, bulky furniture seemed interesting, in a place where you get to have a lot of autonomy and take a lot of risk. And so it's been now 9 years since I joined Wayfair, and it's still been a great ride. But that's really for me, those are the through lines that sort of keep me intrigued in places, and I think really what matters most.
There's so many current Fortune 500 CEOs who were previously consultants earlier in their career. Was that kind of your thinking at the time? Were you being strategic and saying, okay, I want to go from advising to really owning something?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd give myself as much credit to say was I being strategic. I just knew for me, like for me to really be engaged in things, it had to be something that I felt like I was truly a part of, and whether I owned it or whether I was there permanently and was responsible for whether my recommendations or advice gets seen through. That was really important to me. I knew that going in. The great thing about Bain was that you can be very open with them when you go in there. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I'll probably be here for a couple of years, and that was fine. Like that's a path that a lot of people take. And so that's why for me, the next step to a startup was almost going that to the extreme. It's like, okay, now you go from that, now run a startup, and all of a sudden the stress changes to, okay, we've got to, not just about growing, we've got to pay payroll, all these things that are, again, really sense of ownership and autonomy. But yeah, I think I'd be interested in reading your piece when it comes out, but that would make a lot of sense to me. It's like a lot of people come in, you learn a ton, and then you're like, all right, well, now I really want to be on the other side.
Yeah. Well, let's shift to Gemvera. It was sold in 2016 to Berkshire, which was certainly a milestone and a stress test. What did navigating that acquisition teach you about leading through a high stakes deal?
I think anytime you're going through that, you've got challenges in the sense that you want to be transparent with the team about what's going on, but at the same time, you have some confidentiality you want to follow. You still have to run the business. Your customers are still there. And you also get really you really sort of thinking about, okay, I want this business to succeed even post acquisition. And so what we tried to do is be as transparent as possible with folks that this is going on. Here's why we're excited about it. Here's where the benefits come through. And at the same time, you're negotiating deals and you go through a process where you've got a funnel of people and all of a sudden that funnel goes from 30 interested parties to 1 to 0. Oh my god, no one. Okay, we're back to 1. And so I think it really taught for me as I look back on it, it really gives a good perspective about just like, how in the moment things seem really tough and stressful, but at the end of the day, it's just work. Like you work it through, and then really the importance of making sure that you are transparent with the team, that you're bringing them along, and that you still maintain focus on the customer. The last thing you want to do is be going through an acquisition process and the business doesn't do well because you lost sight of that.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a balancing act, and I think anyone who's in the startup world knows what it means. You're balancing so many different hats because there's not that many people there.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, let's, kind of discuss the varying sizes of Gemvera and then where you are now at
Yep.
Wayfair because you moved from a leadership role there. At the time, it was a $65 million venture-backed startup. Now you're at Wayfair, $12 billion in revenue, number 358 in our eponymous Fortune
Yep.
500 list. What drove that leap? And then how do you adapt to such a dramatic change in scale?
I mean, what drove that leap again? Like, I was nervous at first because it did feel like, man, it was in that time. I don't know, it was much smaller than 12 billion then. But again, one of the things that I've learned there, it's not the company size. I've seen places, as a consultant, you see places that are much smaller than Wayfair, but still feel like they are a massive, massive organization with a lot of hierarchy. And I
In
was
what way?
slow decision making, a ton of layers. To get a discussion with senior people, you multiple steering committees. So
Very
I was trying to
bureaucratic.
avoid that. And what I found with Wayfair, and it's an ethos that I think the company's been really good at, and our founders and our CEO Neeraj Shah has been really good at, which is we are really sort of laser focused on removing hierarchy wherever that slows us down. And so it remains a flat organizational structure. We hire incredibly bright people and we basically say, here's a really hard problem. We hired you to solve that. We're there to support you. We'll engage heavily, but we give people autonomy. And that's been really exciting. And that's what sort of, as I think about Wayfair, it didn't feel like a giant company was there. It felt like this feels like a startup with more resources where you can take even bigger risks. And so that was the exciting thing. And, again, it really depends on as you're thinking about the companies to join. I think size of employees or revenue can be a misnomer. It's really about the culture and how the companies are run, which makes it changes sort of how it feels.
You say autonomy certainly at Wayfair. Autonomy of what? To make an impact, decision making?
Yeah, I think it's both. So I think like autonomy of decision making is one thing, but really autonomy of decision making feels a little bit shallow because if your decisions don't lead to impact, um, it's not much. So I think for us, it's really, are we betting on someone and giving them the chance to make an impact? Are we putting people in roles where they have stretch opportunities to make an outsized impact from where they are today? And then are we giving them the support they need so that we can help them understand mistakes quickly, understand how help them pivot quickly if necessary? But it really is the ability to make an impact. And again, if I go back to that question about the thread that sort of brought me through, it's like that's one of the great things about management consulting is you get to make an impact early on. A startup for sure you get to make an impact. And at Wayfair, it's the same thing. It is really everyone has a chance to make an impact on the business that is relatively substantial.
Mhm. Your roles have changed over the years since you entered
Yep.
Wayfair, and we'll get into that a bit more with some specificity. At the time, however, when you first started, what was the challenge they wanted you to solve for?
Yeah. So when I joined Wayfair, I joined to lead two teams. The first is what we called our house brands team, which was how to grow our own proprietary brands from a very small percentage of revenue to a much larger percentage of revenue. And then the second piece was the team that went out and launched multiple suppliers to get more selection on. The house brands piece is really interesting because there, if you think about the furniture space and home space, most people don't have brands they recognize. Like, I don't know who makes these.
Are you judging our furniture?
No, I
Jared
think they're
Fortune?
great, but even no matter where you go, right? There are
Right.
no brands. If you think about a category like that, you've got millions of permutations. It's super high stress. It's one of the most emotive purchases you can buy because you're building the room and the space where your family's going to be, your friends, your memories are made. And by the way, there's a whole sense of style. People will judge you, but you're going in very blind. So it's overwhelming. So building a house brand program where we can help the customer, help her navigate by style and price point by saying, okay, putting these collections together for her at a scale that no one had ever seen before, because it's not like you're going into a normal retailer where there's 1,000 SKUs. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of SKUs who manufacturer A has never talked to manufacturer B, manufacturer C, but our job is to put these things together and help the customer create a cohesive style. So building that up, and we built that up really quickly from a small percentage of revenue to being an incredibly large percentage of our sales very quickly, which is exciting, but also a lot of mistakes along the way. And the other side was assortment. Like key for Wayfair anywhere is making sure that we have the best assortment, whether that's quality, up and down the quality spectrum, price, same thing, style. So how do you go out and how do you accelerate the amount of suppliers that you can do? And that team started off, it was, launching, we kept increasing, and today it's a global team sourcing the best products from all over the globe. Um, so two really interesting opportunities. And then as we built those out, sort of more opportunities came sort of naturally as we sort of thought about, okay, how does this build next? How does this build next to where I am today?
Yeah. You said there were mistakes made along the way. Can you share one and what was instructive about it?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that, we prioritize at Wayfair is just is, how do you move fast? And across both those spaces, when we were launching products or new suppliers on Wayfair, sometimes we would launch too fast and the supplier wasn't ready to scale with us. On the house brand piece, sometimes we would take items and we'd put them in a brand that would help the customer. They might move between brands. The customer might get confused. And this led to a lot of issues. I think the one thing where we're always quite good about, at least I've seen at Wayfair, is what we try to do, because we're generally being pretty ambitious on these long term. Most of our initiatives are multi-year, long term, and that's one of the things we really focus on. So we tend to sit down when we do these initiatives. Say, okay, what is the 3 to 5 year? Like, how do we think about this? Are we aligned on the general vision? And then how do you take that back and say, okay, if that's going to play out that way, what is the next 6 months going to look like? What is the next 3 months? And how do we get together on a recurring basis to make sure we're tracking things, not to get anyone in trouble for messing up, but more to understand, do we need to pivot? Are things not going the right way? Why are they not going the right way? Have a really open discussion with the full team. And so I think one of the things I've learned through Wayfair, but also going through many of examples of these, is that, you come in with an idea, you think it's a great idea, inevitably it's not, it's 51% right. But as long as you have smart people around you and those people then help with that idea, you quickly pivot and sort of course change over the time and get it to something that's really meaningful.
You've been promoted or you've changed roles roughly every 1 to 2 years. How have you managed that advancement? Was it self directed and intentional? Was it serendipitous and opportunities kind of fell into your lap?
Yeah, I don't think anything. And I was thinking about this the other day. I was talking to one of the junior members on our team. We had a coffee chat, and they were asking like career advice. And I think the question was like, "Oh, is this like strategic?" And for me, none of it was really strategic. Or, I mean, there's serendipity and luck in almost everything I've done, right? So there's a lot of luck there. But for me, it's really been just making sure that I find opportunities where things are messy, where it's hard, where you're most importantly, you're working for the people below you are super smart. And I've been fortunate enough where most of the teams I've worked with, the folks who are working for me, are generally smarter than me. And that just gives you a ton of scale and a ton of leverage. And it's a great thing because if that's the case, if you have people that are smarter than you and are really talented, man, what leverage you get from them, what learning, they get an opportunity because you're going to give them more and more scope and scale. And so everyone really wins. And and so for me, that's been the key. And again, like there's plenty of serendipity and luck in all of the journey, but you just get so much scale and leverage from having really smart people on the team, and you sort of you sort of treat each other well, and you sort of end up in good spaces for both of you.
Well, presumably your role now as president of commercial operations is far more expansive than your title when you joined. I'd also assume that there's a learning curve. There are new skills that you have to cultivate. What were those skills? What did you have to learn along the way?
Yeah, I mean, there's everything from functional skills, right? There are plenty of functions that I oversee now that I hadn't overseen before. Got a large marketing organization across brand performance marketing. I'd done a little bit there, but not that much. On the operations side, we've got 20 million square feet of warehouse space in North America and Europe, and then we've got buildings in Asia, including final mile delivery and middle mile delivery and all these logistics services. So and that goes across everything, right? So there's a ton of functional knowledge you have to build that I'm still learning, and I will continue to learn because I can't be an expert in there.
Well, that's what makes it fun.
Yeah, that's what makes it fun, right? It's never boring. And then the other thing obviously becomes you have to learn how to manage different types of people, because managing a creative group is very different than managing performance marketing or managing data scientists or managing operations people. And so that's the other thing that's sort of really challenging to learn, and being open and sort of really being honest and humble and saying, I don't know much, can you teach me, is really important. And then the third thing is just as you think about the scope of things, yeah, it's been an expansion of scope, and it's just making sure that you're honest with yourself and you say, yeah, I don't know everything. um, it's going to be stressful, but you're going to sort of learn as you go, and you ask for help when you can. And most of the time I'm asking for help, it's from people on my team.
Yeah. You said you think in multi-year stages. What's the most pressing priority for you this at this point, or a couple pressing priorities?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things that we've been able to do is, we take a pretty broad portfolio approach, and we have a number of really big bets that we think that will play out over the next 3, 5, 10 years. So there's a number of them. A couple of things that come to mind. One is our physical retail investment. We've been dabbling in physical retail for a while, but a couple of years ago, we opened our first flagship store in Chicago, 150,000 square feet. And this isn't a showroom, this is a real store. We've signed leases for 3 more large format Wayfair stores. Today we have 12 stores in general open. We have stores for each of our specialty retail brands, which are separate brands focused on the specialty space, which compete with Pottery Barn, Williams Sonoma. And then also we have 2 stores, one open, one opening soon, for our Paragold brand. And these are big investments. These are not things we're saying, okay, we're going to open a couple. As we think about the physical retail space, online in the home space has been growing rapidly. We'll continue to take share, but physical retail will always have an important role. So we want to be a big player in the physical retail space. So that's an area where, that's a multi-year investment for us. But at the same time, we have to make sure every single store is working.
Yeah.
And you've got to be incredibly detail oriented, and that, you're meeting constantly and thinking about the small details to, again, course correct where necessary, but it's part of a larger plan.
And when you say making sure that every store is working, make that tangible. What is a success metric?
It depends on the brand and how we think about it, but the way we've thought about it to date is the stores on their own have to be doing well, right? So you've got to have, within the 4 walls, they've got to be performing against key benchmarks. You want to see really strong growth, and we've seen that. Then you also want to look at what we call the halo effect. And that's for, like, if you take Chicago, for example, we opened that store. What we found is, yes, the store was doing well, but then the overall Wayfair performance for the surrounding area in that part of Chicago increased dramatically as well. So that was a great experience, because that meant that people are coming in the store enjoying it. Then they're going home in 5 days, 10 days, we track all these 15 days. They're doing shopping online at a higher rate than they were before. So we tend to look at both 4 walls, halo, extended halo, to really understand what's the full impact of this. And as you go down the path, and that's what we do for all of our stores, you then start to think about, what else do you get? Well, you get marketing leverage in those areas because you've got a store there, so more people know it. And it's been really cool to see, because even you think about Wayfair as generally a well-known brand, but 50% of the people or more who come into that store in Chicago are generally new customers to Wayfair. So experiencing the brand.
It's interesting that you're making this huge play, or I should say, a considerable play into physical retail. When you think about retail as an industry, a lot of retailers are actually pulling back on brick and mortar stores. Do you think that there's something particularly unique about home retail where people want a really tactile, hands-on experience? Is it the aesthetics of it? Why this push in this entry into brick and
Yeah,
mortar?
I think within the home space, there's always going to be a need and desire for people to want to touch and feel things. I don't like. I think that's always going to be the case. Again, online's been taking rapid share. We've been the beneficiary of that. But I do think there's that. And then I think for us, there's other advantages. One, it's really we're a well-known brand, so going into a market tends to have a good effect where people are excited to see what Wayfair in person, which has been great. And the other piece is we're able to leverage a lot of capabilities we have. I mentioned the 20 million square feet of warehouse space across North America and Europe. That means that typically when you go into a Wayfair store and you buy a sofa or a large item, if you go to another retailer, that might take 6 to 8 weeks to arrive to you. Within Wayfair, that might be just a couple days, and sometimes it might be same day. And that also means we take advantage of the fact that we have all that inventory locally, so it's another way to sell it.
Mhm.
And so I think we're all actually structurally advantaged in that sense as well. And then finally, it helps our online business because when someone comes in and they say, "Oh, I love this couch," or "I love this chair, I love this end table. You guys have it in brown and blue. Oh man, I was really looking forward and whatever." Okay, great. Let's go to the site. And all of a sudden, you've got the millions of SKUs advantage that way.
You've repeatedly mentioned the criticality of having great teams, great team leaders.
Yeah.
What are you looking for when hiring? How do you develop them?
The first thing we look for really is like, does this person have horsepower? Like, can this person take on really hard problems?
And they show that how?
During
What are you
interview
looking for?
process, you
Okay.
look at experience.
Okay.
Have they taken on hard
Mhm.
problems? Have they taken on areas that are sort of like we call them gray, right? Where there's not a clean answer. It's like it's messy. Are they humble? Because I think the one thing we always find is, and I've learned a lot in my career too, it's like having pride in your own ideas is it's never a good thing, right? So it's like, do they care more about the right answer than them having the right answer? And that's one of the common things where I've seen people be really successful. It's they might have a hypothesis they'd lead with, but a 22-year-old in the room might raise her hand and she might say, "Actually, I think like that part's right, but I disagree with that." That leader then can say, "You know what? I recognize that's a good idea. Let's go with that." So it's just it's not about ownership, it's about chasing the right idea. And then the third piece you always look for is like, can this person also build other great teams? Because for them to scale, they need to have people under them where they can get leverage from. And having someone who's just like, you've run into these people that are just on their own incredible powerhouses, but there's only 24 hours in a day, right? So it's a challenge.
Delegation's key, and it's a tough
Yeah.
one. I want to talk about Wayfair's growth and market strategy a bit more. Wayfair saw a surge in demand during the pandemic when we were all stuck at home,
Yep.
redecorating our homes, and then a kind of a cool down as life has normalized. And I'm curious how that, I don't know if I'd call it whiplash, but that change in market dynamics has reshaped your strategy for sustainable growth.
Yeah, no, it's been you think back like 5 years, it's been sort of crazy, right?
Mm.
COVID happened. Everyone decided like we were just going to buy furniture online, which is great.
Were
And
you one of
demands.
them?
What's that?
Were you one of those
I
who bought
definitely
for?
was. I definitely was. Like I'm sure. I hope you were
I
too, right?
absolutely
Like it's
was.
at home. It's like, man, we might be at home forever. Who
Yeah.
knows, right? So, uh, yeah. So demand spiked. We had to chase demand. We were remote, obviously, and so we did what a lot of companies did at the time, which was we overhired. We had too many people, and then things sort of corrected. I think where we were fortunate and thoughtful about it, which was we realized very quickly, and you've got a tough housing market. Okay, so very quickly you have to realize that we need to continue to stay nimble because other people are struggling, which means we can take share by making investments. We need to make sure that we don't lose our speed of decision making, which means that we stay nimble and that we have ways to continue to invest in areas when others can't. So after COVID, we really looked hard at our structural, sort of how we set up our structure and our org structure. We made sure we were incredibly lean, that we, removed all the hierarchy, and that has enabled us over the past, call it 3 to 5 years, to make big investments, to continue to invest in our proprietary logistics network, to invest in physical retail during a time when others were struggling, to build up programs like we just launched a loyalty program that has been incredibly powerful for us, a Wayfair verified program that takes the millions of items we has and we physically inspect the best sort of 30 to 60,000 of them to put our stamp saying these are the best ones. And that has enabled us over the last 5 years when others have really struggled to take a lot of share in the marketplace. But it's hard to do that unless you're really, if you're really serious about, we need to make sure that we do not slow down, that our decision making stays fast, that we continue to be a place where people have great opportunity to advance and learn.
You said part of this process was removing hierarchies. Are you referring to middle management? Was there a bit of a bottleneck when it came to decision making?
don't know if it was middle management. I just think,
Mhm.
you get to some parts and, it's as we think about org design, you're sort of always looking at it and making sure like that everyone there is really adding value. And I think again, like so many people during COVID, it was just, there was such a demand and demand was going so crazy that we just hired a lot of folks and you get to a spot where things need to go through many different layers. And again, it's really looking at those and saying, okay, when things slow down, when decision making can't be as rapid as you want, when you can't be as nimble, we need to make sure that the layers make sense.
Mhm.
That we have people where, again, we want to take really good individuals and stretch them in roles. Do they still feel stretched? Do they still feel like there's really big opportunity? Because that's sort of like the makes it a really fun place to work and engaging place to work.
I want to talk about kind of the current macroeconomic landscape because, as you already alluded to, Wayfair sources its assortment or much of its assortment globally, certainly in the US, but also globally. And new US furniture tariffs are creating kind of cost pressure across the industry, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you're seeing. So, how are you balancing the need to protect margins with this, imperative to keep prices still attractive for shoppers?
Yeah, for us, I think we're advantaged in the sense that, we have suppliers all over the globe. So we have people, North American suppliers, we have obviously ones in China, Vietnam, Malaysia. So that lets us have a lot of different items. And then we're trying to make sure that these suppliers that are suppliers, we're partnering with them to make sure that the best prices come through. So if costs go up somewhere else, we've got folks in different places that can do that. And I think also because of the fact that we don't own any of the inventory, we're able to be much more reactive. And if people want promotional environment, we can do that. We work with our suppliers. I mentioned one of the moats we have that really invest in is building partnerships with our suppliers. So we'll work very close with suppliers, say, look, this is a really good opportunity to do a promotion. We'll work with you on that and making sure that we are bringing the best prices to market. And again, that all comes from making sure that as you think about where you invest, are your investments going back to the customer? So when we have opportunity, do we pass that back to the customer in terms of prices? We usually do.
Let's talk AI. Where do you see most potential for AI to move the needle?
AI has been incredibly helpful for us in a number of different ways. Our pricing models, you think about pricing millions of items and how demand changes on a day, intraday basis, building a dynamic pricing model and moving, continues AI to help us there. When you think about forecasting and forward positioning inventory, so how do we think about, okay, we're bringing in inventory into California, New York. How does this item, how much should we forward position in the middle of the country? How much in the South? So AI has really helped up our game there, build accuracy. On the marketing side, AI has been really helpful in how we generate content, right? Really cutting out a lot of the costs about how do you build videos, how do you do that? And then, so it's really been sort of all across the company. It's an area that we're incredibly committed to. And I think one of the learnings we've had is, you sort of got to start though from the problem. I think a lot of people with AI, it's like, oh, let's have an AI task force. It's like, well, you can't just take a technology and say, build a solution for it. It's like, where are the challenges, the really hard challenges where we need to solve? How do we do that? And that's what's been really helpful. And then the customer experience side, we recently launched a platform where customers can come on and basically see a scene um, and constantly generate new imagery, direct different types of things based on the room, get matches of products they have. So AI has been really helpful even on the customer experience. So we'll continue pushing pretty hard there, but always thinking about what is the customer, what's the supplier, what's the company problem solving back for, versus, oh, AI is really cool, let's figure out how to use it.
How are you using AI on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, on a day-to-day basis, I mean, for me it's really helpful for everything from, when you get an email, a long document, getting the summary points. I'll still read the document, but it helps because it's like, all right, I'll look out for these things. To uh, you know, to basically, we had just had like a leadership team outing, and that helped us plan the event, right? And everything also then to think about analysis, like when you look at if I want to have some data cuts, like we built a number of proprietary tools that allow me to go on to our data environment and be able to say, okay, how many orders for this item? Like, help me cut the orders this way. What insights do you see? And so it's been really helpful to do that. And it's been basically gives you the power of a lot of analysts really quickly.
Mhm. How do you lead? What are your management principles?
Yeah, I don't know if I have like set principles. Maybe I should, but I think,
How would your team describe you?
oh man, I don't want to think about that. I'll tell you what I think about, like, the things that I think are important, and it sort of mirrors what we are talking about before. I really tend to focus on making sure the team is staffed with really good people and really smart people and ambitious people who mix that with humility. One that makes it much more fun. It means that people are not taking themselves too seriously, but they've got great ideas. I try to be someone who is focused, again, not on caring about whether my idea wins, whether we just like chase the right idea. And so I try to make it so that if we're together and someone more junior than me has a better idea, great, let's do that idea, right? Like being very open to that. And that usually means leading with hypotheses, even if they're not the best hypotheses. I view my job as to move discussions forward and help move things forward, but typically I'm not the one coming up with the answer because we've got all this horsepower around. So, some people would say like strong ideas loosely held. I don't know if that's the right answer, but I think that approach tends to work pretty well with hypothesis led decisions. And then I think also, a big part of it for me is constantly having sort of perspective because things get stressful. And I think, for me, having a family definitely helped with perspective on that. But, just being able to take a step back and be like, okay, right now things are intense. There's a lot of stress. We're gonna get through this. They're bigger, they're like having some perspective. I try to always at least maintain that and try to find the humor in some things because again, things are really hard. Things get tense, but you sort of got to take a step back and have the perspective. And definitely having a family and kids has helped with that perspective.
The ultimate stress,
Yeah.
the best stress. Especially in moments of stress. I'm assuming the pandemic was quite stressful, just given all the orders that were coming in. How do you get buy-in from your team? How do you communicate a vision, a shared vision, so that a merchandiser in Berlin and a data engineer in Boston are hearing the same message and are aligned and are able to move forward?
Yeah. I think a lot of that is from, working with my team to make sure that we craft the vision together. And as we thought about, I mentioned those competitive moats we have, or if I think about building the plans and the alignment for each of the big initiatives, these aren't things that come top down. It's sitting with the leadership team and saying, guys, what do you think? Here's what I'm thinking. They'll say, okay, that part I like, that part I don't like. So you get buy-in, and I'm not doing this to get buy-in, I'm doing this to make the idea better. But once you do that and people buy into it, you then all of a sudden get leverage, right? Then a vision is transportable. Then that person takes is okay, here's what I want this team to do. And all of a sudden you've got a world where things are happening organically on their own. It's the first thing. The second thing is making sure things are written down and shared. Wayfair, we don't do a lot of PowerPoints, we do a lot of documents. And what we make sure to do is that things are documented and written down. And before you come to a meeting, you're expected to have read that document because that makes sure that people internalize things. We have meetings based on the reactions to ideas. So it forces alignment that ways. But again, it's really about working with the team, making sure you co-craft things, and then it gets a life of its own, and then making sure you're very transparent about that. So when you send that document out, it's open to everyone.
You've said ad nauseum in this conversation, you're only as good as the great team you've built, the great team around you. You also said just now that decisions don't come from the top down. It really is a collaborative effort. This is going to sound maybe a bit like a noxious question, but as someone who's sitting at the very top, is your role, especially in this position, mainly to delegate and make the ultimate decision? I mean, how deep and in the weeds are you getting with your team?
Yeah, and I apologize if I didn't mean to imply that decisions don't come from the top down. A lot of decisions come from the
Mhm.
top down. Like there are a lot of times when I've got to step and say, "This is what we're doing," but I do that because people are, you're sort of encouraging a healthy debate that surfaces opportunities, and then it makes it much easier and obvious for me to say, "Okay, here's what we're doing." There are plenty of times where I've got to make decisions though, and say, "Here's what we're doing," and people are not happy with that. Some people aren't happy, and they've sort of got to disagree and commit, and that's okay, right? And I'm open about that. It's okay. And and if it turns out I'm wrong, we'll pivot. That's okay. So I don't view my world as delegating or sort of sitting back and delegating. I think, especially at Wayfair, we're very much in the weeds, right? So we launched something like physical retail, you know, whether the physical retail, is happy about it. I'm in the meeting talking about design decisions. We're talking about launching a loyalty program. I'm looking at screen mocks. Our CEO is looking at screen mocks and advertisements and how we're going to promote it. So it is very much in the weeds. It's very lively debate. Top-down decisions do get made, but they don't come out of nowhere. So top decisions get made when things are slowing and not moving on track. That's when it's really important that teams escalate and you get involved and you say, okay, no, this is what we're doing.
What is the future of the home retail, home furnishings industry? Where do you see innovation coming from?
Innovation will continue to come from how we help customers sort of shrink the catalog for them. And how we think about that at Wayfair and AI is a big part of that is personalization. So making sure when you come to Wayfair, we don't overwhelm you, but you see items that are either ideas that you've already had. So, very basic. All right, I've been looking at lampshades. We show you lampshades. To much more advanced, like, oh, you've been looking at lampshades. So that probably means you want a lamp. And I also noticed you're doing this somewhere else. So it probably actually means you're doing this room. And I notice your style is this. And then even going a step further and saying, okay, great, I know it's about you. I'm serving this up. Actually, I think you're missing something. I actually think you'd be interested in modern farmhouse because I know so much about you. So, hey, interesting modern farmhouse. We think this would be great for you. So it's continuing to personalize and shrink the catalogs that when you come shopping, again, you're not sitting there being like, how am I going to make decisions? It actually feels like Wayfair is there with you, both through the technology element, but also the human services that we have, whether it's designer services, other things that help you come to a decision. So that end of the day, you leave Wayfair and you're like, wow, I was just able to build my aspirational home. I feel like it unique is unique and it represents my personal style. And I feel that what I buy and what I purchase, I'm very confident in actually what I'm going to get. And that's through technology, through personalization. It's through the merchandising efforts we have through our specialty retail brands, Paragold, that verified program that I'm talking about. It's through going into a physical retail store and seeing our best items and experiencing that. And then it's everything around that.
What single role or project most propelled you to the C-suite?
There wasn't a single role or project I could say was the defining one. I think the key thing for me has been in the roles that I've had, being able to understand as scope expands rapidly, how to manage that. And just being able to manage broader scope, understanding what that means, understanding how to get through that has been really helpful because once you figure that out, it's always challenging, but it's less overwhelming. And you know the key things you need in place to be able to continue to manage expanded scope.
Which skills or habits separate good executives from great executives?
Yes, I don't know whether I'm in the good, great, or just bad executive category, but I think
Maybe effective is a better word.
again, like questionable. But I think I think for good executives, again, I think you've got to make the priority about building a really strong team underneath you, and then not just your direct layer. You have to be very meticulous about making sure that you work with your directs to make sure that they have a really good team underneath them. And that means over investing very much in understanding their orgs. And it's a lot of time, right? If you think about, Wayfair, it's thousands of employees, but being able to sit down with one of your direct reports and say, okay, let's talk about your team. Is this, how do you think about this person? Do they have an opportunity? Are we stretching them enough? And really making sure that that goes all the way down because that's critical because it's great if I have a great team, but if my direct doesn't have a great team, then they're in trouble, and then I'm in trouble. So that's like step one. I think the other thing is making sure you lead with that the people around you and that you lead with humility because there's always going to be really smart people. And if you're not humble, you miss great ideas, you miss great insights, and you miss a person who could be a future leader. And the other one is, and again, it's just leading. I like people who lead with hypotheses, even if they're wrong, because it moves the conversation forward and it sets the boundaries for how you want to engage. So I feel like, hey, I think we could have an opportunity to launch an initiative that does this. I think this would have the customer impact, and therefore, as a company, here's what we need to invest. What do you guys think? Okay, bad idea. Great. Let's move on. Oh, this part's interesting. Let's talk about it.
On the talent front, it's interesting you bring that up. I was recently chatting with Gina Massantuno, ServiceNow CFO, and she said the best advice she ever received came from Uber's now CEO when he was CFO at IAC. And he said, always hire people who could replace you in 2 to 3 years. That's how you get the best team. And that way you can focus on your ascension. So that immediately came to mind. Do you think your team could replace you in 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, like again, like I don't think I look at people in terms of that way. I think it's just like where do you get people that are generally smarter than you?
Yeah.
So maybe that means they could replace you tomorrow, maybe in 2 to 3 years. But the key is like, and Wayfair's been fortunate that we continue to take share and grow. So the challenges are always there, but it's just how do you hire the absolute best people, and how do you make sure your team has the best people, and not worry about whether you're going to be replaced or not,
Sure.
because.
Sure. If you could give your 30-year-old self advice with the experience you have now, what would it be?
Don't worry about title. don't worry about, how things look externally. It's like, just worry about, are you engaged in an area that is interesting, hard, complex, and that you find like engaging? Whether that means, you're studying whatever subject you're doing. If you're doing that, the story and what you will learn is much more effective than saying, oh, hey, I'm this title. Okay, great. What did you do? Okay, things fall apart. But if you say, I did this, here's the problem I worked on, here's how I helped solve it, that's such a compelling, not only story, but it really builds experiences that propel you forward. So again, it's the advice I always give is, don't worry about the title. Don't worry about sort of the superfluous things. It's really about, are you engaged in a topic that is hard, complex, meaty, and that you can make an impact on?
Yeah. Well, great segue into the final question. What professional challenges or goals still sit on your career bucket list?
For me, at Wayfair, despite being 12 billion in revenue, we are still such a small portion of the overall addressable market. And I see so much potential in what we need to build. And really, the goal is like, how do we continue to scale Wayfair? How do we continue to serve the customer in the best way possible, is that she keeps coming back, we build loyal customers, and it's just, how do we do it over the next 3, 5, 10 years? And there's such an opportunity. And so it's like, that's what gets me excited. It's like, man, we could do this, that, and there's all this opportunity. And how do I continue to build the team to do that? How do we continue to scale? And that's what sort of gets me up every morning excited.
Fantastic. I think that is a solid place to end.
Okay.
Jon Blotner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Lead.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.